Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing session. So this is the last question for this particular week. We're going to discuss the question on WTO, and this week we have discussed international relations. And in the last week what have we discussed? We have discussed certain topics on security issues. So in relation to international relations, what is the question as in today's question? I opened up this question yesterday. What are the key areas of reform if the WTO has to survive the present situation, present context of trade war, especially keeping in mind the interest of India? So what is this question trying to ask us directly? What is this question trying to imply indirectly? We will just have a look at these things for a moment. On one hand, WTO is trying to survive is what this question is trying to tell us. The question, if you look at it, it says that WTO has to modify itself indirectly in order to survive the situation. So has it come to a situation in which the very survival of WTO has come to a question? Is this what the question is trying to imply? That is one moot question. Secondly, what is trade war? We talked about this situation of trade war yesterday briefly. There are different ways in which two countries can exchange in trade war. What are they? Firstly, the concept of import quotas. Secondly, the concept of increasing tariffs on imports. And thirdly, you could also manipulate your currency exchange rate in such a way that the imports become very costly and simultaneously your exports become very easy. But anyway, these are the ways in which you can engage in trade war. Right, so these are the different tools of using trade war. But there is also a novel method which countries use, and they use this particular method citing the rules of WTO. Like what I'm trying to say is, they create a situation of trade war by using the rules of WTO. And how do they do it? They use the situation of sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So SPS measures, using these measures, a country can particularly say that, see, look, your good is not meeting certain criteria, it is not healthy, it is probably bugged, it has certain germs in it, and we're not going to allow it. And this is not a novel idea. This has been done. Sometimes it has been done voluntarily and on purpose, deliberately. Sometimes it has been done in order to simply reject the goods of the other person. And it was sometimes, like I said, done on honest and good reasons. Like for example, European Union has blocked Alfonso mangoes of India because the Alfonso mangoes of India have been infested with flies in over a period of time. So some of the produce that has gone to European Union has faced this problem, and looking at this problem and citing this problem, European Union has banned our Alfonso mangoes. So this is an honest situation, but there are other situations in which countries deliberately say that, look, your product is not doing well, your product is not healthy, and so on, and they stop purchasing goods of that particular country. So anyway, these are the ways in which they can engage in the trade war. So there are different underlying thoughts under this particular question. So how do we frame the body of our answer? Firstly, I'll talk about the introduction. Introduction means you have to introduce what WTO is. See, there are two ways you could write an introduction here. Firstly, you could talk about a trade war and the ways in which countries engage in trade war. And you have the liberty to do so simply because this is a 15-marker question, right? So you can do that, and instead of that, you could also talk about WTO. You could also talk about how it has emerged as a pillar of creating or boosting international trade. It has come up out of Washington consensus and so on. You could talk about all these things in your answer as in the introduction to your answer. Moving forward, what is trade war as in the present context of trade war has to be established, because he has said that the reforms that WTO has to take, what are they in the context of present trade war. So you have to first talk about the present trade war. Do that. Moving forward, you have to talk about the reforms. And when you talk about the reforms, focus on India, because he has said that you have to focus India. Move forward, and then you can write your conclusion, which is both futuristic, positive. It can be a lengthy conclusion because it is a 15-marker question. Lengthy matlab not 6 or 7 lines, maybe 4 lines at max. Sometimes 5 lines is also doing the trick. Now let's move forward. Look at the sample answer. So WTO is a successor body to General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs (GATT). It has the main intention of supervising and liberalizing international trade. This is a decent way of introducing your answer. It has come as a successor of GATT, and then it has certain so and so functions is what it is trying to tell us. Moving forward, he has given us a small schematic, and these kind of schematics come quite handy when you write 15 marker questions, because in 15 marker questions sometimes you might not have enough information to write an answer. In such a situation, you cannot of course leave a lot of space. You cannot leave one page altogether. You can at most leave 1/4 of a page, or maybe half a page, as in the half of the third page or 1/4 of the third page. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, even in those questions, ideally, in order to not leave any space, you could squeeze in diagrams. And how do we have this set of diagrams? You have to maintain a separate diagram book. And this is something the toppers have been emphasizing for quite some time. Either they make a mental note of the diagrams, or they have a separate set of books, as in separate set of A4 sheets in which they draw these diagrams, and then they can put them down in the answers so that their answers become quite rich. Anyway, this particular schematic, what is it trying to tell us? Let us start with USA. If USA raises import tariffs on Chinese goods, then China is going to face a trouble. The outcomes are its exports are going to decrease, its employment is going to decrease, because if China is an export-led economy and its exports are not performing well, then why will it create more exports? Right? It is going to lay off some workers, as in the companies in China are going to lay off workers, and this is going to create a situation of problem for China. Moving forward, poor shareholder returns of the companies in China. And in such a situation, when China realizes that USA is doing this on purpose, when China realizes that USA is doing this in order to sabotage the economic condition or the economic well-being of China, what does it do? It will immediately retaliate. And immediate retaliation is going to be in what form? It is going to be, of course, in the form of raising of tariffs in return, as in it is going to raise the tariffs of United States of America, and when United States of American goods come to China, they become costly, so that does not happen either. So these same set of problems are also going to repeat themselves in relation to USA, but because he has already written it, he has not written it again, but the problems are going to be same. So if you look at the cycle, what do we call these kinds of cycle? Is it a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle? It certainly is a vicious cycle, because one country is hurting the other and the other country is hurting the present country, and it is going on in a cycle. It is going to lead to a problem. This is the cycle of trade war. That is what he is trying to tell us. Next, recent trade war situation. USA wanted to decrease the 400 billion trade deficit with China. And what is the trade deficit with China? With India, it is around 60 to 70 billion dollars. And compare that with what USA has with China in terms of trade deficit. It is humongous, as you can see. So in order to handle this situation, it wanted to increase the tariffs of imports from China. This measure was also fueled by China's artificial devaluation of yuan. Like I said, China artificially maintains its currency at a low level so that its exports can fuel the world. Its exports can go to every nook and corner of the world. It artificially keeps its currency value low, and by doing so, it has created a situation of export-led growth for itself. It has performed well simply using its export, and China has become a rich economy, as it has become a developed, as in a well-to-do economy, precisely using this model. In fact, this model has come to be known as the export-led model. So in such a situation, if you keep doing repeatedly, it is going to hurt the other country, because you are supposed to maintain your exchange rate transparently. Everybody is going for a floating exchange rate because that is more equitable, that is more useful for both the countries who are trading with each other. But if you artificially devaluate your currency, my exports to your country are going to become costly, but your imports, as in the imports which I get from your country, are going to be simple. So you are going to benefit, but I am going to face a problem, and I don't want that. Right. So USA has realized this situation. USA has realized that the trade deficit between China and USA is too much to bear. So it wanted to go for this trade war like situation. So moving forward, there has been an artificial currency devaluation war between EU, Japan, China. Look, this question is not just about USA and China. This is a question in general about trade war. So the schematic was not to talk about the trade war between USA and China in general. You should talk about the different kinds of trade wars that are happening in the international scenario. So it's not just between USA and China. A lot of countries are going for artificial devaluation. China started it, then European Union did it, and then Japan followed suit, and so on. In addition to this, regional blocs are being formed. So instead of doing artificial devaluation of currency or import quotas, what I'll do is I'll gather a group of friends around me, as in my neighbors. I will form a trade bloc, and then I'll create a situation in which we will trade between each other, and we will do so prosperously, and we will prevent other countries from coming into our particular trade bloc by making it costly for them to come in, by making it costly if they import tariffs and so on. Even if the import tariffs remain same, if the tariffs between these countries are almost negligible because of this trade pact, then also it is a situation of trade war, because what you're doing is you are artificially creating a situation in which certain countries are benefiting and certain countries are not benefiting, and this is not something WTO wants. WTO wants a situation in which all the countries benefit, the trade as such benefits, the growth and the well-being of the world as such is happening. But that is not happening if you follow these regional blocks, if you create regional blocks, artificially devaluate your currency and so on. In such a situation, one can easily say that WTO is going through a crisis, because if it is not going through a crisis, it should be able to handle the situation, right? And it has not been able to do so, which clearly implies that WTO has not done well. Other repeatedly used trade war like measures like imposition of quotas, subsidizing local industries, artificial application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So these are what? These are basically the ways in which different countries use or make sure the trade war like situation happens. As in, this is how countries wage war in terms of trade. In such a situation, what are the key areas of reform in WTO? First, the rejuvenation of WTO dispute redressal body is a must. We have to first fill the vacancies. There are a lot of vacancies in the dispute redressal body, and whatever time frames that are there in order to resolve disputes between countries in relation to trade, those time frames have to be modified. They have to be set in stone. They have to be shortened so that dispute redressal occurs at a very fast pace. Moving forward, you have to provide adequate knowledge to this dispute redressal body so that it can take correct decisions and bold decisions based on adequate inputs from the ground. Moving forward, the procedures and the rules in WTO have to be made more inclusive. This will increase faith of countries in this body, thus supporting its agenda to stop the trade wars. This is a decent point. It could have been written in a concise format. Now let's move forward. So what does he say here? Dominance of United States of America, European Union in WTO should come to a standstill. This will allow democratic rule making instead of unilateral decisions. So why do we have this kind of problem in relation to WTO at the moment? This is because a lot of countries do not feel at ease with WTO. They do not feel that they are a part of WTO. They do not feel that they have a stake in WTO, because everything that happens because of the voting of USA and so on. These countries literally dominate this body. This body is basically a remnant of the Washington Consensus, as in this is a Bretton Woods system, right? So this has proper, as in more than proper representation of United States and the West, and this creates a situation in which these blocks, as in the United States and EU, can dominate this particular body, and they have done so, and they've done it for such a long time and to such an extent that people have stopped trusting WTO as such, and you have to revive this trust. And you can revive this trust by changing the stakes, by changing the vote sharing of all the countries that are there. Shift some of this from the developed countries to the developing countries. In fact, this has been done. A certain amount of percentage of votes have been have been moved from United States and European Union to China and India, but that is quite less, 0.3%, 0.6%. I'm not joking. This is what has been happening. Look at the vote share that has been transferred from United States and European Union to China and India. It is literally less than 1%, 0.3, 0.6%. Anyway, adoption of peace clauses for developing countries. This will formalize the grace period instead of kicking the sanctions on trade war. So what this point is trying to tell us, this is a technical point, but what it is trying to tell us is that countries often, more often than not, they kick in trade sanctions or trade war kind of situations, thinking that the other country is benefiting a lot. Like for example, USA feels that China is using its developing country status in order to create a huge trade deficit with USA, and it has kicked in trade war situation. But before you do that, you need to have adequate peace clauses. Think about what this peace clause is. One peace clause which is famous is in relation to the agricultural subsidies which we have. But the idea of peace clause is important. That is probably something that has to be institutionalized in the body of WTO, is what this question is trying to tell us. These reforms can help prevent trade war like situations between countries. They can help develop a barrier-free world for a shared prosperity. So this finishes the discussion for this particular week. Thank you for your participation. Hopefully I'll meet next time, maybe next week, with disaster management. Thank you.